Immense fortune squandered. The young Earl of Barrymore was not exactly spoilt, but when he was first sent to school his grandmother gave him £1,000 for pocket money. It was the beginning of a short but incredible spendthrift career. The young Earl of Barrymore would bet on anything, from a race between one of his stable of country milkmaids and an entry submitted by the Prince of Wales to the result of a cricket match. And when the Earl entered the betting ring he bet, not in £10 notes, but in tens of thousands of pounds, or, in present values, millions of dollars. This was one reason why the noble Earl was able to go through, in the space of 10 years, a sum equal to about 20 million. Perhaps the youthful Rakehell might have lived a more worthy, if less exciting, life had he not, as an orphan, been raised by an overindulgent grandmother who was never concerned about the loss of £1 million or two. In fact, so indulgent was the grandmother, Lady Harrington, that when she packed the 14-year-old off to Eton in 1783, she gave him £1,000 pocket money. And thus began the pleasure-mad, if short, life of the Earl of Barrymore, who has gone down in history as the most dissolute of all the dissolute companions of that monarch of licentiousness, the libertine Prince of Wales, later King George IV, a weak, heavy-drinking ruler for 10 years. Tall, handsome, and athletic, the inheritor of vast wealth, the Earl, for any sum named, was ready to box, fence, or ride against anyone in England. This gambling obsession cost him nearly £500,000 on the turf alone over 3 years, a sum that by no means equalled his losses on other betting sprees. And when he became stage-struck, he built 2 magnificent private theatres that cost him millions. But all that was before he inadvertently dropped a musket while riding in a carriage and had his head blown apart by the blast. The incredible Earl of Barrymore was born into a fabulously wealthy, noble Irish family on August 4th, 1769. The wild streak he showed almost from the time he could crawl, and which later earned him the nickname Hellgate, was not unique in the family, for the same lack of restraint ran through most of his younger brothers and sisters. His sister Caroline, by her mid-teens, was known as Billingsgate, London's fish market, from her lurid vocabulary. The elder Barrymore inherited the family title and estates at 5 when his father died. 6 years later his mother died, and he then became the ward of his grandmother, Lady Harrington, who had heard about poverty but could not quite grasp the meaning of the word. The Earl was at Eton trying to get through his £1,000 pocket money as quickly as possible, when Lady Harrington's death left him entirely to his own devices. At 17 he went over the wall at the college to attend the Newmarket races, and with unlimited capital now, placed £1,000 bets on each race. He was not concerned when the college expelled him for his adventure. For a time his favourite pastime was exchanging the signs hanging outside inns and breaking windows with a horsewhip. Stagecoaches, too, were a means of fun. He would bribe drivers to give him the reins, and then would terrify the passengers by sending the horses at breakneck speed through ditches, up banks, and across paddocks. The Earl was still in his teens when he bought an imposing stable at Newmarket and took to regularly riding his own horses. Actually, in a single week, and riding his champion mount, he won £30,000 in bets from Sir John Lade, the Marquess of Queensberry, the Duke of Bedford, and that witty and ardent Whig, Charles James Fox. Barrymore used the winnings to go into competition against the famous Astleys in the circus business, and lost the lot as well as another fortune besides. After that, another vast sum went in building a townhouse in Piccadilly and acquiring a mansion at Wargrave Village on the Thames. He was living in the Wargrave establishment when the stage buck bit him. The result was the construction of a private theatre which was considered the best-equipped playhouse in the country. The Earl took leading roles in most of the plays and was a thoroughly professional actor. It cost nothing for a seat, so Barrymore had to pay the professional supporting cast from his own pocket, and that was only one of his expenses. This theatre was so successful that Barrymore built another theatre in London where, 3 times a week, he put on plays to packed, if non-paying audiences. Not that the theatres interrupted his betting activities. In fact, he won £5,000 from the Duke of Bedford by daring to walk up and down the main street of Wargrave in his shirt and nothing else. He won a similar sum from the Royal Duke of York when they wagered to see who could wade the farthest out from the coastline at Brighton. In 1790, for £20,000 in bets taken from a number of noblemen, The foot-running Earl of Barrymore raced the mounted Captain Parkhurst 30 yards up to a tree and 30 yards back again. Barrymore beat the horse by a couple of yards. He was not so lucky when a fat aristocrat offered to race him over 100 yards for £25,000, provided the overweight athlete was given a start and allowed to choose the course. As it turned out, the course was an alley between two buildings in Brighton, so narrow that the Earl had no hope of getting past his opponent. Almost from the moment Barrymore and the Prince of Wales, or Prinny, met, they realised they had much in common. Like women, racehorses and crazy practical jokes. The two often staged furious horse races down the streets of Brighton with fortunes going on the results. The Prince enjoyed these contests, but not as much as the races he and Barrymore organised between their stables of unusually pretty milkmaids. Before each event, the entry's more admirable points were inspected closely by the stable owners, and the whole town turned out to watch these bizarre events. The friendship between Prinny and the Earl was temporarily interrupted when Barrymore, dressed as a girl, gained entry to the boudoir of the Prince's mistress, Mrs. Fitzherbert. The Prince did not see the joke, and the Earl was in royal disgrace. Meanwhile, when Barrymore won control of his inheritance at 21, his spending became the talk of England. He started this last phase of his life by organising great feasts, balls, banquets, often with more than 500 guests. Then, in the midst of these activities, he decided he should have a wife. Although the girl's parents were delighted with the match, Barrymore decided that he and his future bride should elope in the dead of night and then dash in relays of coaches to Gretna Green for the wedding. By 1792, the Earl of Barrymore was in financial trouble. Expenditure was exceeding income, and he still had to pay off the money-lenders from whom he had borrowed before he became of legal age. First he sold his London house, then his Newmarket stables. Finally, his creditors even seized his theatres. He might have ended his life there and then had he not developed a passion for cricket. Back in the Prince's favour by this time, he played in the Prince's team against the MCC at Lord's and lost £1,000 on the result. With his financial security tumbling about his ears, Barrymore could think only of cricket. When the bailiffs came to seize furniture from his Wargrave mansion, he left them to it, and, donning his cricket suit, went off to play in a local game. He bet £100 he had borrowed from his father-in-law on the match, and when his side lost, had to bear his wife's constant nagging that he should repay the loan. To escape the Countess's voice, Barrymore joined the Prince of Wales at Brighton, and there raised the locals' ire by beating up a powerfully built butcher who was urging two dogs to fight. After that, the Earl and Prinny took to covering themselves with bed-sheets and playing ghosts by suddenly jumping out of darkened alleys and terrorising passers-by. With the Wargrave house still in his possession, although it was bereft of furniture, Barrymore finally returned to it, and there got the idea of working for money. An innkeeper gave him a job as chef, and there he worked happily enough for several weeks, cooking 3 meals a day for the guests. Early in 1793, with rumours of a French invasion spreading throughout Britain, the Earl was put on active duty and with his regiment took up a position on the coast. On March the 7th, he was ordered to take a squad of troops and escort a group of French prisoners of war to Dover. With the prisoners and the escorting troops marching along the dusty road, the Earl of Barrymore brought up the rear in a comfortable carriage. Beside him, with its muzzle resting against the seat, was a musket with which the Earl hoped to shoot some wildfowl and supplement his unappetising army rations. Without warning, the carriage jolted violently as a wheel dropped into a deep rut. The musket fell to the floor and the firing mechanism shot forwards. The blast brought a sudden end to the career of the Earl of Barrymore. He was 24. The title was assumed by the late unlamented Earl's brother, who was not among the family's wild ones, and was not interested in horses, practical jokes, or cricket. The result was that the 140,000-acre Barrymore estate was able, within a few months, to erase the huge load of debts the inveterate gambler had bequeathed it. With the 7th Earl buried, only direct members of the family attended the funeral. His widow married a handsome guardsman and for the first time in her life began appreciating the joys of marriage. Nevertheless, while the 8th Earl is now forgotten, his spendthrift, rakish brother has won for himself a permanent, if scarcely honourable, place in English history.